This story happened when I was about 11 to 12 years old. I don't remember all the details exactly. It was one evening when my mother was cleaning my room. My room was so messy, making my mother angrily yell at me and threaten to throw all my things away. That was why I was so angry with her. I slammed the door and decided to run away from home so that my mother would feel sorry for what she did to me. But alas, I didn't know where to go. The street near my house was very narrow, and there was some construction opening the road, so half of the urban area to the east of my house was demolished and looked dilapidated. I didn't know where to go, so I deliberately went to the construction site where everything was being demolished, to try and stay temporarily, of course. I was sure no one thought I'd come here, and they would be worried about me. When I walked in, I was a bit scared because there was no one and no light, so I was a bit confused about my surroundings. I felt a little scared because of the silence there too. I was about to give up and return home when suddenly I heard a voice in front of me. I decided to follow the echo. Until now, I did not understand why I was so brave and not afraid of anyone. After going to a corner behind the abandoned building, I saw a few adults playing skipping rope. The strange thing was that even though they were old, they danced quite agile and lightly. They laughed and joked with each other like children, which surprised me. My presence startled them. When they saw me, they all stopped and turned their heads to look at me with surprise. Their smiles were weird, and at the time I was hypnotized like someone who urged me to dance with them. I couldn't control myself, automatically stepping up and joining them even though I didn't mean it in my heart. Everyone danced and skipped smoothly. I was not used to it. It was difficult for me to keep up. After a few jumps, I just couldn't keep up with them and the tempo started to increase very quickly. I could not jump and start to tripping over the rope. I then fell to the ground and my hand hit the rubble, so I felt painful. As I lifted my hand to take a look, I was shocked to see that it was bleeding. These people who were jumping the rope didn't come to help me. They just smiled and looked at me with very calm eyes as if nothing had happened. As if instructed by something that was telling me to grab their rope to get up, I unconsciously danced with them again. It seemed that I was being controlled by some force. I was beginning to feel exhausted, wondering how these elders managed to dance for so long. They didn't even speak, not even a breath of fatigue. Their actions were very consistent. I felt exhausted but couldn't stop my feet from moving, until I heard my mother calling me from outside. My parents came out from a corner, and when they saw me they breathed a sigh of relief and were angry that I had run away from home. As for me, when I saw my parents I was so happy that I cried. I burst into tears because they arrived just in time to save me. Mom grabbed me by my shirt and scolded me with a few words. I was about to tell them that there was some older people here who made me jump rope with them, but when I turned to look, the people had disappeared without a trace. I thought to myself, how could they all just run away? Maybe a fear of being scolded by my parents. Then I was dragged home by my mother, and the closer we got to home, the stranger things became. The following day after school I went to the place again for memory. Everything in there was in ruins and uninhabited. I wondered where those older people went and where they came from. All the houses were destroyed and the street lights were dimmed. So what happened that day, and who were those older people? The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. As soon as I turned a corner, I couldn't help but be startled, as if I couldn't believe my eyes. There were several paper statues erected next to the ruined wall. Someone made these statues and painted them as older people. There was a rope on the ground, apparently the same robe the older people used last night. I even saw my own blood on it. I was shocked when I saw the scene. I later learned that the house behind them used to be a shroud shop. Those paper statues may have been abandoned during the relocation, and I could have danced with these paper dolls. From this, I no longer dare to step out in the street at night.
Killing someone by using a straw scarecrow.
This is a scary story that I witnessed myself. My grandmother's house and my friend Jin's grandfather's house were opposite each other. We were the same age and our parents were both divorced and living far away, who abandoned us, of course. We had so many similarities, so we also became good friends. Jin had a pale face and looked a bit malnourished. She lived with her grandfather, who was aggressive, and his way of upbringing was mainly beating and scolding. The one time I was most impressed was when I was doing my homework in my room and I heard someone swearing downstairs very loudly. Hearing the voice, I knew it was Jin's grandfather. He scolded her again, hitting and scolding her aggressively in public. Jin didn't resist, didn't run away, but only bowed her head to receive the beating. Some people in the neighborhood saw this and were deeply saddened, immediately stopping and tried to convince Jin's grandfather to stop being so violent towards her. But he was a stubborn, selfish and very aggressive person. Anyone who dared to stop him would be scolded and cursed with harsh words. "If anyone ever challenges me, I will beat them and I will beat the child, so get out of here!" Therefore, the people around him also didn't want to be involved in what he did. 1 year ago, I was also beaten like this, beaten until my eyes were black and blue. I couldn't accept this, so I understood what Jin was going through. The two of us decided to run away to the roof of a building when we wanted to escape. It was our secret little attic. Jin's heart was obviously filled with hatred towards her grandfather, including her parents who abandoned her and made her miserable as she was then. Every time she was beaten by him, she would record it in a notebook, which the purpose of was to avenge when the time would come. Jin hid it in the corner of the closet in the attic where no one could find it. Later, as we were growing up, when I was in my freshman year of college, I took a vacation to visit my grandmother, and from there, I discovered Jin's terrible secret. She dropped out of high school after entering society. We rarely saw each other. We hardly had any contact with each other anymore. As soon as I went upstairs that day, I saw Jin's grandfather's door with a white wreath like a house in mourning. When I got to Grandma's house, I asked how it was Jin's. At this time I knew that Jin's grandfather was dead. This made me surprised, so I asked her why he died. I just thought he died of old age at first, but I didn't think it was a suicide. Before he was discovered, he had been hanging for several days. Everyone said that they were also surprised because with Mr. Jin's character, he would never hang himself to commit suicide. Jin, after hearing that I had returned to his hometown, came to me to inquire about the situation. She looked indescribable then, as she was 180 degrees different from when she was in high school and looked like a gangster senior. Seeing Mr. Jin die, I wanted to comfort her so that she would be less sad and not blame herself. But she didn't seem sad. She even felt comfortable being alone. Jin's face looked very relaxed. Not a single tear had fell. And she also told the truth, that she wished her grandfather had died sooner. After a year, we were completely different, could not find a common topic anymore, and the conversations that we would have ran dry. Jin was busy with work, so she left first, leaving me alone in the old attic. But I felt curious. I really wanted to know, what did Jin go through all those years? I didn't know if she still had the habit of writing in that diary, but was the diary maybe still hidden in that drawer? Opening the cabinet, I couldn't help but be surprised. There was a scarecrow dangling inside, a creepy one. There was plenty of bloodstains on the straw scarecrow. Then, I also found Jin's diary in the closet. I nervously opened it and was surprised at what was written inside. It recorded the method of using blood and a scarecrow to curse someone, and the cursed person would die just like the scarecrow. The hanging scarecrow looked like Jin's grandfather and was hanging in the same way. I started to understand what had happened when I heard someone's voice behind me. While I was in my own thought, my neighbor, Auntie Liu, was upstairs to get some clothing. She startled me. The contents of the notebook made me confused. I did not believe that Jin could kill a grandfather like that. I didn't dare ask Jin about this, nor tell anyone. I could only put the diary back in its place, pretending I didn't see it. After that, we hardly saw each other ever again. Sometimes we did have a little contact, but just politeness because she scared me. She also said in her diary that she would use the same method to deal with her parents, whom she hates very much. I really don't know how to solve this problem. This is about something that happened at an all-girls school, taking place in the girls' dormitory. The story revolves around a schoolgirl named Mimi who was on the way to the bathroom late at night and all alone. It was only herself walking down the corridor towards the bathroom when she realized how extremely dark it was. Because it was late at night, the lights in the bathroom were off. She thought that she would be the only student this time of night, but then she saw someone or something. It matched the appearance of a long-haired girl combing her hair in front of the mirror. Because the hair had not been dried yet, there were still a few drops of water falling on the floor. But when she saw that someone had not returned but was still brushing her hair, she turned on the light and went in. Later, she discovered that the girl's head was not wet from water. It was blood. Drops of blood that was still dripping down her feet. After a short while, when the girl turned around, her face was red, covered in blood. Mimi shouted and her hands and feet were shaking as she stood there. She was so frightened that she had no choice but to crawl out of the bathroom immediately and shout for help. Suddenly, someone shook her. It turned out that it was her roommate who called her to wake up. As she woke up, she realized it was just a dream. But her roommate said that just as she was dreaming, someone jumped from a window out of the building. Moments later, the roommate took her to the balcony to see what was happening. At the time, they looked dumbfounded as they looked down. When she saw it was a girl in a white dress lying downstairs with a lot of blood on her head, and whether it was the girl from a dream or not. As a result, Mimi couldn't tell if she had actually seen her that night or she had only seen her in a dream. The next day, everything was fine. But at night, being in the dormitories would somehow make people a little nervous. A few days later, she went to bed and the other roommates were also fast asleep. Only Mimi was still there to remove her makeup. One of Mimi's friends at the time woke up to a clicking sound coming from the room. As she woke up, her friend saw Mimi still sitting there as if putting on makeup. She found it strange, and she was curious. She called out a few times, but Mimi didn't answer, and the lights in the room didn't turn on either. So she walked up behind Mimi and looked. Meanwhile, Mimi was using an eyebrow pencil repeatedly on the area of the eyebrows, resulting in a deep and large incision that looked painful. Seeing this, she wanted to pull Mimi's hand away, but Mimi's was very strong, so she woke up the other roommates to help her. The other roommates called an ambulance and took Mimi away. The dorm used to be a place for female students to rest, but now it has become a scary place when Mimi's story began to spread. She was always worried that something terrible would happen again. After falling asleep, she dreamt of the girl in the white dress. Suddenly, a white dress fell on her. Out of panic, she woke up from a dream again. Of course, Mimi was not the only one who encountered this situation, and there were also many people living in the same dormitory, so they joined forces to find the principal and explain the situation. Due to various pressure, many dormitory buildings were left empty and the female students moved to a new dormitory building, and no more strange things were happening. Every time someone passed by the dormitory building, they could see someone standing in the window. In the evening, that figure still looked very real, wearing a white dress fluttering in the wind and wild, soulless eyes. This is a story about some strange things happening at the hospital. Each of us knows that in hospitals there were many stories of birth, old age, sickness, and death. My story is that of a department. The department was the ICU area, or we also called it the intensive care unit. The people who lived there were all seriously ill. It could be said that all patients there had been through the gates of hell once or several times. My friend was in charge of that department, so I also heard a few special stories. The story my friend told me was that there was an old man surnamed Chen who had just had a tumor removed by a doctor, and the old man was pushed into the ICU. The surgery went well and the old man woke up quickly, but when he woke up, the old man's voice suddenly became strange. He didn't even recognize his children when they were standing beside him. Moreover, he said that he was a different person now, and stranger than that was that he even gave another person's home address and the family background. All of this confused his children, as they were extremely worried about him without knowing if this was supernatural or some after effect from surgery. The doctor said that there was indeed someone with the same condition as described who was in this room before, but that person passed away. The doctor was also surprised to hear all this information. He thought that maybe the old man was having problems after surgery. When the doctor tried to explain to Mr. Shen's children what had happened, they couldn't believe it or understand anything. They could only listen to the doctor's observations and monitoring during the treatment. The old man had another very strange thing that night, that he did not sleep, but talked into the air as if no one was listening. There were voices and laughter as if there were real people in front of him. Symptoms lasted for several days like this. One night, when the old man surnamed Lu was lying on the bed next to him, he heard a noise. When Mr. Lu was lying on the bed, he looked back and saw people gathering by the old man's bed. These people didn't have their faces cleared out. Their appearance might have been fake, or they were ghosts. Suddenly there was a lot of noise both inside and outside the bed he was lying on. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound and could only lie still on the bed pretending to be asleep. It was almost morning when the men took away a person who had lived in Mr. Shen's bed a few days ago but had died right before he took the bed over. The next day, 2 children came to see and visit Mr. Shen. Then Mr. Lu suddenly realized that Shen was still lying on the bed, but also talking normally. As nothing strange had happened, He said something. He said that maybe a few days ago Mr. Shem's bed had a dead person lying there, so he gained their memories. Yesterday, they came to take him away. He also had no recollection of what he heard the patient in the next bed moaning like he couldn't breathe. He turned his head and glanced vaguely, seeing something like a black figure squatting on Mr. Liu's body, and then gradually overwhelming his body, making it extremely difficult for him to breathe. Mr. Shen desperately wanted to call for help but could not make a sound or move. He couldn't move until the physical signs alarm went off and the nurse came to check on him. The patient in the next bed passed away that night. He told the nurse what he saw, but the nurse didn't believe him at all, so the old man told his children. The kids were so scared that they went to the doctor again and asked what was going on. The doctor said that this phenomenon was quite unique and was caused by different reasons that would affect the patient's recovery. After being in the ICU for a few days, he was transferred to the general ward. There was no such thing as a weird going, as to whether being in the ICU was really a commonplace. And in this world, there are supernatural things that happen, so we don't dare to lie. Exchanging the heart for tofu. This story was told by the elders some years ago. It was said that there was a restaurant in the village that served tofu. According to an old proverb, the three hardest jobs in the world were boat building, iron forging, and tofu making, because you had to get up every day at 2 a.m. in the morning to start. To grind the soybeans, heat the soy milk, and finally press it into tofu was a hard job. Then, before dawn, you would have to cycle through the caves and alleys to sell it. Tofu sellers peddled the streets until someone bought from them. Their tofu was outstanding. But there was a problem that buyers always had. A problem of underweight tofu. A peddler adjusted it on the scale, and it looked like it was enough when weighed, but each scale was missing 100 grams or even 200. Sometimes a few careful buyers would bring it back to weigh again. Later, when they found out that their tofu was underweight, they asked why, and they also said that sometimes the tofu lost its weight due to transportation or weather. Obviously lack of credibility, but buyers were often afraid of trouble, so they didn't say too much. Everyone had their own reason. Then generously paying a part of the compensation or adding another piece of tofu. Anyone who made contact with him thought that he was easy to talk to. He had been in that business for 10 years. It was also said that if you go for a walk by the river with no shoes on, you should not get wet. And for this tofu seller, something wasn't right either. Every day he got up early. Even though he felt sleepy, he still rode his bicycle and got lost in the deserted forest near the village. He was dozing until someone called to buy tofu, and suddenly he had to wake up. At the time, an old woman came out of the forest and said she wanted to buy tofu. He didn't even think about how an old woman appeared out of nowhere and would buy only 2 pounds of tofu. Doing as the old woman said, he cut a piece of tofu. According to his calculations, the piece of tofu weighed 2 pounds but could be called the heaviest. He added another piece, but it still didn't weigh enough. While 2 large pieces of tofu weighed 4 or 5 pounds, he was wondering if the scale might be wrong. But the old woman decided to say something shocking to him. Only then did he realize what was happening, but it was too late, because the old woman suddenly appeared with long fingers and nails, which she inserted into his chest and ripped out his heart. Then the old woman bent down again to pick up a stone. He threw it straight into his chest and said she would see until he stopped deceiving others and change his conscience. Only then would his heart grow back automatically, as he was in so much pain and fear that he creaked for a few hours and then passed out. He didn't even know how long he had been lying on the ground, but when he woke up, he couldn't see the old woman anywhere. There were no wounds on his body, and his heart was in excruciating pain. He looked into the forest where the old lady had come from. Except for a few ghosts, there couldn't be anyone else. As he took his bicycle to go back home, he had to endure the pain. When he got home, he instantly fell sick as he laid on the bed. He gradually lost his memory, and his mouth was painful. The sickness stayed with him for almost half a month. However, he said that after he would change his conscience so that he wouldn't lie to others anymore, and the pain in his heart would gradually heal. That day he knew he would have to change his way of doing things to ensure a healthier future.